Guys, today is about strategic growth. This is a topic that, similar to the one yesterday, just pulling up the schedule, I'd say the first 6 weeks of the program is about marketing a domain and a function in and of itself. And yeah, we talk about how marketing connects to all things, but the second half is really about other areas of the business and how to grow the business beyond the marketing side. And for me personally, this topic, when I figured this out in my days at Wild Apricot, it really changed the trajectory of the business, and it helped me kind of reframe my role. And I kind of shifted from being like the chief marketing officer to the chief growth officer of that business. And I was involved with product and M&A stuff and a bunch of other things that were going on. So that's what I want to talk about today. And I think a lot of marketers either don't get exposed to it or don't think about it as much, because the topics in the first 6 sections that we've covered are always top of mind, and that's kind of what you're held accountable for. But today's topic, what I want you guys to leave with today, is to be able to look at your respective business and think about strategy and the decisions being made inside those companies in a different way, and be able to also contribute to the conversation at that level. So you'll notice that this session it's less intertwined with all the other sessions that we've talked about, but it is kind of like the bird's eye view on how to make decisions. And then when you get down to each of the levers, then you kind of bring a lot more detail to it. So I want you guys to have that bird's eye view, because a lot of people just don't see that. With that said, and some of the people that are jumping on, just a reminder, next week is off because of Thanksgiving. Then we have back-to-back sessions, 5th and 6th, and then 10th and 11th. So with that said, let's jump in. So again, reminder, the goal here is to get you guys to think like a C-level marketer. We're not going to be talking about tactics. It's going to be high-level strategic concepts. And today's topic, like I mentioned, is strategic growth. And I look at marketing as a subset of growth. And when we talked about this in week 1, I mentioned that, we are part of the larger business context, or the larger plan inside of an organization. And so we have to always think about what is the best avenue available to grow the business. And then marketing, or the levers inside marketing, will just be some of those levers. And so we have to figure out, where does that fit on the priority list, and what are all the things that we can do? And in general, I like to start by really understanding what is the objective. And to me, one of the first lenses to think about it is how do you maximize total customer value? So you have a market, you have an ICP that you target, and you're able to sell them something. Great. But if you're not able to grow that relationship over time, then that customer's value, one, is not recurring, but two, you just don't have a lifetime value to be able to serve them better, to grow your organization, to provide more products and services, and a bunch of other things. And so if you're able to build a strategy that allows you to grow the relationship with the customer as time goes on, that opens up all kinds of possibilities. And regardless of what kind of business that you're in, there are only a handful of levers that come around. And I'll start here just to explain that there's really 3 ways to grow any business. It's not just B2B, it can be SaaS, it can be e-commerce, it can be retail, it can be any manufacturing, it can be anything. It's 1, you need more customers. 2, you want to increase your average deal size. And 3, you want more repeat business. Every growth idea you've ever heard of fits into one of these 3 buckets. And if you do all 3 of these really well, you're going to increase your total customer value. And in the B2B context, as we split those 3 levers out, it kind of shakes out to something like this. We have to improve our churn and LTV. We have to do more upsells and cross-sells. We can leverage pricing, referrals. We can do better with onboarding. We can increase our average deal size or contract value, and we can improve usage and get more folks to use the product. And as we figure out how to make an impact on each of these levers, it becomes clear that the growth levers kind of coincide with that. So if you were to outline all the opportunities available to you, it's new revenue, you want to expand your existing accounts, pricing like we mentioned, and then there's all these other sections here, if you ignore attrition on this side, but new products, new markets, new business, new segments, M&A, these are things that we don't talk about as much, or haven't so far, but these are levers or avenues that are available to a lot of businesses. And if you don't capture, you leave a lot of value on the table, and you don't end up maximizing your total customer value. And a lot of your competitors can actually kind of go and capture that instead. And so the idea is that a lot of companies are actually drowning in strategic opportunities. They can actually do 30 things, not 1 or 2 things. And so the problem is that they end up either focusing on the wrong one or leaning too heavily into one area and can't really figure out what's the best way to deploy their limited resources or which strategic growth opportunities to actually pursue. And one really good framework, there's a book, it's called Profit from the Core. And actually today's session is structured around that book. Had a big impact on me as a business leader, and I think everybody should read it. It's written by a couple of Bain and Company guys, I believe. And they talk about this concept where you start with your core business and you try to maximize whatever's there. Then you go to a one-step adjacency, and then you go to a two-step adjacency. A one-step adjacency is something that is super close to your core business, and a two-step adjacency is a bit of a leap. You have to do additional things or be someone that you're not in order to be able to serve that adjacency. And so the order of operations, as another way to kind of put it, is step one, define the core business and really figure out like what is the business that we are in? Are we in the real estate business? Are we in the food service business? Are we in the technology business? A lot of companies get this part wrong. So first, if you truly understand what is the business that we are operating in, then you can figure out what actually enables you to separate yourself in that marketplace. What is your source of market power and differentiation, and what gives you a moat in the marketplace? Using a how to SaaS example, there are hundreds of marketing agencies, and it took us a while to figure this out, even though it was kind of right in front of our face, is that our source of market power is our private equity relationships. More than people that follow me on LinkedIn, more than the books, more than anything else that we do, it's the private equity relationships, because for any other company to come into this market to try to compete with us, that is probably the last thing or the hardest thing for them to acquire, which is our relationships on the private equity side, because they're so hard to find, so hard to build trust, so hard to get into that club per se. And so for every business, you have to kind of almost have this self-awareness exercise to understand what is it that is differentiating you and giving you that market power so that you can kind of double down on it. And that's kind of step three, which is figuring out, have you maximized the potential? So for us, as an example, I don't know every private equity investor out there. We know about 70 to 100 private equity firms. At this point, I kind of lost count, but let's say it's 70 to 100, but there are thousands of private equity firms. There's several deals, even in the firms that we know, that we are not brought into because something else is going on. There's other dynamics at play. And so for us to grow this business, we really have to double down on those relationships and try to capture as much of the value that sits inside those relationships to add value to the people inside that ecosystem, and then meet more folks in the private equity space. So what is that for you? And then finally, we get to the adjacency expansion of other ideas, initiatives, products, geographies, markets, et cetera. And we're going to talk a lot about that in a second as well. And a great example of this, I'm jumping around in slides, but is if you look at Atlassian, we talk about Atlassian a lot in these sessions because I'm a fan of that, the company, but you look at their core is Jira, Confluence, this project management and organizational management type of ecosystem of products that they've created. And then one step adjacency from that is when they acquired Trello. And Trello is also in the project management space, but it targets down market. So instead of tailoring Jira to serve down market, they buy Trello to compete in that space. And a lot of your companies, I'm sure you sat inside conversations where the company wants to go up market or down market. And it's just like one of the things, it's like, if we do that, and we land just one enterprise customer, it'll make up for 3 or 4 middle market or smaller customers that we land. And then the two-step adjacency is they also bought Loom in the last couple of years. And this is not connected to the core product that they sell of product management or organization management, but it is related to communication and feedback and projects, and integrating video feedback into Trello or into Jira makes a ton of sense. But to take that leap, you have to be as big as Atlassian because they've built so much of their foundational business and captured so much of the core value that sits there that they can take this much of a leap. If we were, as a group, starting a new project management software company, going and acquiring a company like Loom, even if it was proportionally smaller, would be a mistake because we have not maximized the core business. And so this whole strategic growth conversation is one of those things that happens inside boardrooms, inside executive teams, but it really starts with, as a group, having the self-awareness to know which areas are safe to expand to and which ones are too risky to expand to. And in some cases, the answer will be it's a hell yes, and in other cases, it should be a no. And I can give you an example of this that happens all the time in the private equity world is you'll often see roll-ups of like, I've seen companies in like church management and other industry, I can list all kinds of verticals, but where people will buy multiple overlapping tools that compete with each other in the same market. And the entire play to bring them together is financial engineering. We're going to bring all these companies together. We'll put them under one brand. We'll merge the teams. We'll fire some people and we'll have more enterprise value. Truth is that that's actually not true, because if you don't grow the company fast enough and you take on a ton of debt, it can really mess things up in the long run for the enterprise value that you're creating. It does work out from time to time, but I've seen countless examples of it not work either. So you have to be careful as to when you do that and how you do that and which area you really choose to bet on. Okay, jumping ahead. So what we've talked about so far in the first 6 sessions is really about maximizing the core, because most companies, even the ones that we meet as clients, have not done that work. And so that's why when we run through things like identifying your best fit customers or allocating your budget by vertical or making sure you have the right product marketing process, or are you investing in the right channels, like all the stuff that we've kind of gone through, the right channels, do we have the right content for the different stages of the buyer journey, the sales questions that we talked about yesterday, the transformational framework. Give me one second, I'm going to refresh this. This iconic positioning conversation, we had this a few weeks ago when we were talking about product marketing and content. We talked about working our way backwards from retention, then through to getting more leads and traffic, working our way backwards from in terms of revenue potential. Like all of this stuff is about maximizing the core. It's just a framework on how to do it so that you're doing things in the right order and getting things to a good place with the business. But really, if we zoom out and we go in terms of strategy, why are we doing this work? Well, because if we were to look at all the levers available to us, one of the best things we can do is improve our net revenue retention. One of the best things we can do is cross-sell, upsell. One of the best things we can do is increase prices on our existing base, because that's the easiest revenue to acquire because of the value we're bringing from our product or whatever, right? So all this work so far is just one half of that puzzle. And you can kind of see even in the strategic initiative slide that I put together in one of the earlier sessions, where you can kind of map those opportunities. But when you think about your investors or the investment thesis behind the business, there's like another half that needs to be done. And these work streams are almost running in parallel, because you can't stop the train of the strategic growth conversation just so that you're maximizing the core in a lot of cases, especially if you're owned by private equity or you're a larger business. If you're a smaller business, you can. So like on our side, we're not private equity backed, it's bootstrapped. I'm super meticulous and try to grow slowly so that we don't have these like revenue spikes and have to fire people and layoffs and all that kind of stuff. And so we've kind of steadily grown. So I have that benefit, but we're also a smaller business. If we were a $50 million strategy consulting firm, maybe it would look very different, right? And so in your situations, you have to kind of balance your time, your resources, your people between this maximizing the core type of initiatives and these other strategic levers that are being pulled. And I'm assuming inside most of your companies, you're not always in those conversations. A lot of this stuff is happening without you necessarily being a part of it, or even if you are a part of it, like some of it is happening like in terms of based on what's in the investment thesis or how much the company needs to grow overall beyond whatever marketing needs to do. And so it's really important for us to understand what that other half is and how these two sides connect together, and how you as a marketing leader or a revenue leader prioritize initiatives between the two. And so I want to explain the theory behind this and come up with give you guys a bunch of examples. And I'm going to use Shopify as our governing example here, because it's a pretty mature business and they've gone through a lot of the evolutions that I'm describing. And so we can see it kind of play out, and everybody's kind of familiar with the brand as well. So that'll help the conversation. So starting point is, this is the crossing the chasm framework. Everybody's kind of seen this, and this idea that products evolve over time, and you have different groups of people that take an affinity to your product or buy your product as it matures in this context. If we were to kind of plot revenue along with this curve, you would find that there's an initial acceleration of revenue increasing significantly, and then it starts to plateau. And this is true for almost any business or any product line. And the reason is that slowly over time, there's just less people to sell to. there's more competition, there's other options, there's other alternatives. And so you just don't grow as fast, right? When the iPhone grows, initially it's crazy. Everybody wants one. And then Samsung and Google and everybody else starts to compete with them, and the margins get eroded, or you have to increase prices to stay competitive and things like that. So the point is that you are going to hit this plateau one way or another, regardless of what product you have or wherever you are in the product lifecycle. This is why innovation is super important. And I want to remind you guys of that triangle where I say product, marketing, sales. This is why all of these things connect together. And I spent a lot of time in the theory side of it because I really want you guys to understand the principle, because I don't know each of your individual cases. But if you think about your businesses, you should be able to take this theory, apply the context, and then add the data, and then you'll have the answer for your particular situation. So if we were to kind of look at these S curves, you have one product and you start to see it tailor off, you need a second product or second innovation to drive growth, and then a third one. And then collectively, your overall revenue grows over time. And you might have some products that you have to sunset, but because you're continuing to innovate, your overall business continues to grow. And this is why the growth strategy side is important, because you could be doing all of this work, and it could be that there's an external threat to the business or an existential threat that you have not factored in for, that ends up costing you all kinds of revenue that you just didn't consider. And a couple of like big examples, like right now, Google is dealing with this existential threat, right? With ChatGPT and OpenAI, it feels like a ton of the revenue that Google makes is at risk unless they figure this out to compete in that marketplace as well, right? So they have to spend an extensive amount of resources in this innovation cycle. The question is, what is an innovation cycle? Well, if we think about it organically, then it's definitely improving your product, improving your service, improving the feature set you offer, or the benefits that you provide, or the problems that you solve for. So you definitely want to do it inside your existing offering regardless, and that will allow you to extend how much time you can spend in the growth phase for any particular product. But beyond that, you actually have to extend the business or expand the business to other dimensions. And so this is the profit from the core framework that I mentioned earlier. And if you look at the left side of this business, the left side is more connected to things that you can do with your existing set of products today. So this is going after new geographies, going after new channels, going after new segments. And the right side of the diagram is completely new things, new areas of business, new investments that you have to make. So this could be new products, new business, and new value chain steps. And I'm going to kind of explain why this is important, because one way or another, whether you do this work or not, and so the S curve is one reason, like, which is your business is going to plateau eventually over time. So that's one reason. The other reason is that whether you do this work or not, your customers' needs are not just limited to what you sell. And coming back to iconic positioning stuff we talked about in the context of content. We said, well, your customer has certain pain points and your product solves those. And your content should try to address all their other pain points, because you're going to be more of a household name for them, because you're helping them with more of their issues beyond just what you solve for. Well, the same is actually true on the product side, because they have these issues one way or another, and they're trying to solve for them in the marketplace, even after they've purchased your product. And so they're spending money on it. And using Shopify as an example, let's say this is Shopify 15 years ago, and they just have an online store software and a website software. That in that ecosystem, a retailer is probably still using Moneris or some other transaction platform for their POS. They're probably manually posting on marketplaces like Etsy and eBay and Instagram and TikTok and other places. They're using something else to manage their inventory. They're using something else to do their shipping. And so all of this revenue that sits inside that customer is going to somebody else. And if we using as basic share wallet exercise, if you're capturing just a percentage of that, the more you expand into all these other areas, the bigger the portion you land from that customer. And coming back to another framework from earlier, which is that your CAC is lowest for existing customers. We already know this, and it's intuitive when we're talking about an existing product, but it is also true for adjacencies. because we already have the customer in our database. It's just a matter of building the right products to service them, so long as we know that there's a fit. And so this is a complex example, but it uses a fictional alcoholic beverages company. And it talks about all the different things this company can do to expand, right? So we look at segments, they can go after all drinkers, female drinkers, male drinkers, younger, older, and they can go after non-alcoholic adult drink. If you can see right now, everybody's pushing like a zero alcohol drink out there, right? It's not an accident. It's just because it's a growing adjacency that people like Heineken need to capture. On the flip side, you can also have forward integration in terms of distribution and places where you can get the product out to customers. And then you can also expand to the supply chain and take over from where you brew and distill the product to where you package it to even where you grow all the raw materials that go into the product. So I don't want to go through the whole diagram here, but just to kind of explain that inside every business, you can actually have several steps inside each of those avenues defined. And some are going to be closer to the core and some are going to be farther than the core. I would actually put the non-alcoholic drinker piece closer just because it's basically the same business, but slightly different ICP. But still, if we were to just map that out for your business and think about what are all the steps and places where we could expand, there's probably a lot of opportunity that your business is probably ignoring just because something is just one adjacency away. And it could be a matter of having one or two features inside the product that open up that adjacency for you. The next point just to highlight is that even though these ideas are good, there's risk associated with it. So the risk increases as you move from left to right. So on the new channel side is probably the lowest amount of risk because you don't really have to change anything. It's the same product, but you might just open up a new method of distribution, whether it's partnerships or going direct to consumer or anything else that you can leverage. As you get into new segments and new geographies, you have to change more things. You have to maybe change languages. You maybe have to change your messaging. You have to do different things, but still overall, the product is similar. As you move to the right, this is where we need to invest a lot more. We need to get engineering involved, product involved. We have a lot more resource distribution between ideas or different business units. And then when you have a fully new business, like trying to integrate Slack and Salesforce is very different than trying to integrate Pardot and Salesforce, if you know what I mean. Because Pardot and Salesforce are part of the same problem. I would almost call it like new value chain step or new product more than a new business, because Slack is a communication tool and now somehow it has to work with Salesforce. And so the further out it is, the more time it's going to take, the more people it's going to take, the more money it's going to take, and the lesser the likelihood that it's actually going to work. And you've probably seen this play out with big and small companies, and even in companies that you've been in, where sometimes an acquisition is made and there's all these theories of cross-sell and upsell opportunities. And when you get down to it, it is incredibly hard to cross-sell and upsell the thing that you just bought because the ICPs are different, the needs are different, the pricing is different, the go-to-market is different, the sales process is different. And before you know it, the investment thesis is actually wrong because somebody made it on paper and they didn't really completely understand all the details involved. And so it's really important to know what are the resources required to make that a success. And the point is that expansion requires the whole organization. It's not as simple as we have a new product, let's just go sell it or let's just bundle it together. You actually need product integration, engineering needs to work on it, CS needs to be involved, you need the right help site, you need the right sales materials, you need the right sales training, you need the right website, like right advertising, all of this needs to come together. And the more you move to the right, the more extensive the work is. And that's why we kind of have to decide which avenue to take with each one of these expansion areas. So build, buy, and partner is a very common thing in product management that everybody talks about. I am a big fan of build as much as you can internally, unless there is a strategic advantage or a source of, when we come back to this framework of source of market power that is very difficult to acquire otherwise. It's, in my opinion, usually better to build because buying doesn't work out as well as you think in most cases, unless that source of market power is really there. But that being said, buying can also be a very powerful tool in a big subset of instances. And that's why it's one of the main growth strategies that private equity firms deploy. And then finally, you have partnerships in cases where it's a business area that you just don't want to get into. You don't want to add that stack or layer to your business. And I can give you an example. Like, we've thought many times to build an agency, and it's just something that we're not going to do because it is a whole other type of business, and I just don't want the headache. So I've decided to never do that. Even though there's a ton of revenue sitting there, we've had plenty of customers ask us. We could probably close $1 million plus in retainer business as soon as we open that up, but we just don't do it. And we instead choose to partner with agencies and just refer clients out to those people. So sometimes it can be an existential decision. Sometimes it can just be like a lifestyle choice. Sometimes it can just be that it's too risky. But depending on the situation, you want to pick the right one. On the build side, the risk is obviously distraction because your core team already has a bunch of stuff to work on. So if we build something new, it's kind of difficult to give it everything because the core team is already working on a bunch of stuff. And to fully commit, then it's kind of hard to do. You almost need to have like, that's why when you hear the Steve Jobs stories and stuff, it's like the pirate flag and a small team, and they kind of remove themselves from the core team, is because building something internally is difficult otherwise. You can't do it while you're working on the main thing. And just combining this with the other framework that we talked about in terms of maximizing the core. So if you look at this, right, these green boxes here are all the things that we've talked about. Improving your net revenue retention, upsell, cross-sell, pricing, improving close rates, increasing awareness, leads, pipeline, etc. All these things are the standard, maximize the core, the sales and marketing stuff that we've been talking about. This is essential stuff that we have to do no matter what. And then if you go upwards, this is where we're talking about the expand the core. And this is new channels, new geographies, and products and new business and everything. So your risk and resources goes up when you go up vertically and also horizontally. And if you look at new businesses on the top right for a reason, because it is the riskiest of all of these. Whereas improving net revenue retention, this is core current business. I mean, new channels, still the same core business, we're just expanding new channels. So the risk is lesser here. So you can kind of see, based on all of these avenues, you kind of have to decide which ones you want to focus on, and each one has different implications. So I'm going to run you guys through this a bit, right? And not the green boxes because we've covered that many times over. So in terms of new geographies, whether you're expanding to Europe, Latin America, wherever, and there are companies on this call that have this type of presence, you already know, like it's having localized collateral, localized reps, support teams and SLAs, product changes that need to be considered. GDPR is something that people have lost their hair over, stuff like that, legal considerations that we need to adjust for every time we expand to a new geography. And that connects to the product side. You can see that, for example, Shopify enables you to charge in whatever local currency that you have. And this takes product effort. So it's not as simple as just expanding to a geography. They have to enable transactions because they're an e-commerce platform and product comes into play. When we go into new channels, this is where we need to change our marketing strategy, how much we're deploying in terms of budget, who are the people working on this. As an example, if you've never really launched an ABM campaign, and now you say that you want to go up market because you have deal sizes that are north of 100,000, I can almost guarantee that your team doesn't have the skill set because you've never done it before. So whoever has been generating your content or your nurture programs or running your events has been running it more generically for your whole audience. So you don't have enough resources to run a one-to-one playbook to all your top accounts. And so immediately we need to hire more folks in order to be able to pursue this as an opportunity even. And this is the kind of education that I have to do when we work with boards and CEOs. Is idea will be in the investment thesis, but the adjustment will not be in the strategic plan. And put that to you guys to say that you're going to be in these conversations where some of these expansion things are put on your plate, where you do need to move up market or you do need to do something new to expand whatever you're working on, but you don't have the right resources. And you have to kind of explain the complexity of what they're asking of you and getting the right amount of support to make sure that that's successful. Okay, next, this is an example of the new channel. So for Shopify, this is making sure that in the growing landscape of social media, you can actually sell anywhere. You can sell on Instagram, you can sell on TikTok, you can sell on Pinterest, eBay, Amazon, everywhere. So if they didn't develop this in product, Shopify would become way less relevant, especially because of how much people are buying on these platforms. Not everybody's always going to your online e-commerce store to buy. They will literally just buy it from the platform that they're on. So you have to make sure that you have those integrations. Okay, Next, new segments. We talked a little bit about upmarket, downmarket, but it could also be verticals. It could be partners. But in these cases, you need to change your product marketing. You have a different go-to-market, especially if, let's say you're going upmarket, the go-to-market approach is different than if you're going downmarket. If you're targeting partners, your partners need a go-to-market. I meet a lot of companies where partners drive a ton of their business, but they don't have a dedicated partner go-to-market strategy. They don't have differentiated pricing for partners. So all of this needs to be changed if you're going to actually go after that segment of the market. And again, using Shopify as our example, they have an entire Shopify Plus and enterprise offering where their go-to-market actually looks quite different than if you go to their main consumer-based website, and different features, and you can talk to sales differently and stuff like that. Next, on new products, we could be talking about add-ons and modules and new product lines. And in this case, we need to think about what is our pricing strategy to bundle these things together. What's our upsell, cross-sell strategy? How are we going to integrate these products so that something that you do in one product shows up in the other product, right? It's not as simple as just calling up our existing customer base and cross-selling. You can do that, but that's basically the same thing as these products being separated. And a good example of this inside the Shopify ecosystem is how much they've invested into all the different ways in which you can transact on their platform, including the back office and the point of sale terminal and a bunch of those things. And they compete with other folks like Square and other providers, but because they have the online platform and everything, they're super competitive there, right? Whereas Square does not have the same type of online e-commerce presence as Shopify. So next, new business, we're talking about completely different ICPs that you're going after. If you are targeting someone that is the same, there's always a distinction. Like, what is the difference between new products and new business? I would say one of the big differences is a different ICP, because a new product is something that you could sell to the same ICP. A new business is you're in the same ecosystem, but now you're also targeting different folks. That's how I look at it. And so you have different competitors. You have to have completely different go-to-market, different product strategy, everything. It's almost like it's a completely different company, right? But you're running them together and more integrated together. And so in the Shopify ecosystem, we're talking about like payments. Payments feels like it's a one-step adjacency, but they have Shop Pay and all the stuff that kind of goes into this. They have their own payments platform. And I think they maybe partner with Stripe. I don't know if they do anymore, but one way or another, they see that as a core part of how they generate revenue, and they take a percentage of the transaction volume, and it ends up being an entirely different line of business. But they're not competing with other online store providers, or if you want to use Squarespace to set up your online store, they're competing with PayPal and all the other payment gateways that are Authorize.net and everything else that's out there that you could potentially use for your online store. And then finally, I'd say new value chain steps. Here, the big thing is you serve your ecosystem across a certain spectrum, and there are parts of your delivery process that you are leveraging other people's businesses for. And so how can you integrate that into your offering and maybe even bring that into your product by developing it yourself? Payments is actually an example of this too. So it's kind of a tricky one where you kind of fit in both. But either way, in some cases, you may white label someone else's solution. You may have deeper product integration. You may have to leverage a partnership in order to be actually able to deliver that new value chain step. But the idea is that in order to offer that, you have a completely different go-to-market to go after those customers, and a different product infrastructure, different messaging, different everything in order to be able to launch something like that. And so a good example here, because I wanted to distinguish it from payments here, because payments feel still closer to the core business of Shopify. But here we're talking about shipping, and shipping involves logistics and warehousing and all this other stuff that is way beyond the business that Shopify is actually in. And here you can see that they're partnering with Flexport and UPS and DHL and everybody else to kind of actually deliver on this. So Flexport is a massive business in that space, makes sense. UPS is in that space, makes sense. Shopify doesn't need to build it from scratch. It would just end up being in an entirely different business. On the flip side, if you look at someone like Amazon, instead of partnering with these guys, they just built their own infrastructure, right? So they almost entered a different business or created a new step of the value chain for themselves because it was so core to their differentiation, right? So their promise is Prime, one-day shipping or whatever, and they want to get it to you as fast as possible. So they want full control over that, right? So they're not partnering with these folks in those cases. So depending on kind of what we're talking about, the expansion refines the core. So the example, actually, the Amazon example would have been good on this slide. But regardless, as you decide to integrate things and expand to certain areas, you're going to need to talk about your business differently. An example of this is Intuit. Like if you go into just QuickBooks and the website, they're going to talk about how you can use it for your books and run your business and everything. But they have TurboTax and Credit Karma, and they also have MailChimp. It's kind of like, I don't even know how exactly MailChimp fits into this whole ecosystem. I'm sure they're still figuring it out. But I think that's a trickier one. But on the flip side, if you look at Meta and how they talk about building human connection and all of that, this is not how Facebook used to talk about themselves 15 years ago. Right, but they can do that now because they have Instagram, because they have all the other platforms, that WhatsApp and everything else that helps people communicate with each other. And so this feels super unified in terms of where they're trying to go. And so the idea is that if you don't do this yourself, somebody else is going to do it, right? So it seems like, this is a lot to take on, but every time Shopify expanded to all of these different areas, it unlocked that share of wallet piece that we talked about. And it also created a better moat for itself and created a stronger source of market power that other competitors could not duplicate, even if they may have a single part of the supply chain or a single part of that ecosystem that they might do better than Shopify. Shopify has the whole part of it. And so if you don't do this, your competitors will. But that being said, there are good expansions and bad ones. So characteristics of good ones is when there's actual synergies and efficiencies to capture. You can actually expand total customer value. It actually fits in with your overall value proposition, and it actually helps you create an elevated position in the marketplace. On the flip side, and I'm sure you guys have seen bad expansions, it's where you overestimate synergies. Maybe you cut costs way too much. You rely on financial engineering as a way to drive enterprise value. And this is super common in the private equity world. Let's take these two companies. They're both 100 million, merge them together, fire half the team. A couple of years later, it turns out that some of those people were important and doing important things and you needed to grow faster, right? So it's really important to keep some of these things in mind, because if you just rely on financial engineering, you're not doing most of this stuff well. And you're not really sticking to the core and kind of growing that. And one way to keep ourselves honest about this, and we use the profit from the core framework, but if you guys remember from week 1, I talked about this idea of the activity system and knowing what are the core pillars of your business and then building around it. Like this is a good way to build self-awareness, to know what is the business that we are actually in, why do people buy from us, what separates us, what are our differentiators, and then you almost look at this piece inside that core circle, and then you kind of expand from there, and it becomes a lot easier to figure out where you should go. I'm going to give you guys a few more examples. Just to bring this more to life, I'll use our own example to start. We started off as just a strategy consulting firm. Then we expanded to books and thought leadership. That this seemed like the most logical place to invest next. And this is like our free offering. Then we expanded to due diligence. Then we launched our fractional CMO services. This is year 5 is when we launched our C-level marketing program. And the next year will be the first year we launch our own software. It's called Inquisio. It's going to be coming out probably January, February latest. But I would say over the last 5.5 years, like if you ask my team, I've been contemplating these two ideas the whole time, and we just never do it because there's almost always more stuff to do in our core business. And so we just never get around to it. And this year we said, okay, finally it's time, let's do it. And going forward, there's other avenues that we haven't explored. So if you look at each of these business units or product lines, they can have their own profit from the core exercise. And so for marketing due diligence, the next step is commercial due diligence, where we also factor in sales, because that's a question that we get asked all the time about outbound SDRs and what to do better with their account executives and coverage and things like that. And then for the CMO side, can we do fractional CRO work? Can we do executive search? These are things that we are constantly discussing as an add-on for our clients, and it would be a very natural adjacency for us to expand into. We look at some bigger companies, like looking at Tesla. It starts with the electric cars, goes to supercharger network and solar panels and all this stuff. And slowly you can see it expanding into more product lines or more types of cars for different income levels. Full self-driving is one of those things. And this seems like a subset, but it enables an entirely new product line for them going forward. We look at Salesforce. We talked about Slack earlier. Pardot and commerce and the data side, this is what truly built Salesforce over the last 20 years. And then they acquire Slack, and lately they've been talking about agents only. Who knows if this one will work? And you can kind of, if you look up the material on Slack, it's not clear if that acquisition worked either yet. But that's the progression of trying to build a plan. And if it doesn't work, we know that it'll be because of one of these reasons, because they may be expanded into something that they're not supposed to expand into, right? I'll skip this one, the Apple, kind of an obvious one, but just to explain on the Microsoft one, I think it's worth saying that this is Windows Office, and the PC is what built Microsoft for like 20 years. Again, they expanded into gaming. Recently, they bought Activision, which fits into gaming. And then Bing was one of those product lines that wasn't really doing well or wasn't able to break through. But then they invest in OpenAI, and all of a sudden, this is a huge opportunity for them, right? And I didn't put OpenAI here because it's kind of a subset of this strategy for Microsoft, but technically it is the main strategy. So you could probably swap these, and then you have Azure that competes with AWS and everyone else. And the idea is that you have to be careful how you go through these expansions. The large companies we talked about basically have infinite resources. If they decide to invest into something, they're able to run with pretty much every lever that we defined. But in most cases, if you think about your company, if it's 10 million, 20 million, 50 million, 100 million, even more than 100 million, odds are you don't have unlimited resources because there are so many things to do. And so I'd say focus is the key. And for me, a general rule is like, it's ideal if you can just focus on one thing and bring the whole business around the one thing. But even if you have like a larger business, like $200 million company, I'd say 1 to 3 things, because getting that one thing right can change everything. And so it's figuring out where's the highest ROI inside all the levers of the business, and where should you deploy that limited capital that you have. And if the more you understand this and the overall strategic map, the more you're going to be able to influence growth. So I know we stayed in the strategic level, but I want you guys to really be able to kind of think about this for your respective companies. And similar to how when we talked about the content side, about building a content roadmap and operating like product teams, your strategic roadmap is like the higher level version of that. And that people like the CEO and the board are actually always thinking about this. And so the more you can kind of contextualize all the initiatives against these levers to grow strategically, the more you'll actually make an impact on the organization. So with that said, I will stop.